Maxwell Perkins, at the end of the 1920s, was the leading editor at Scribner's and Sons here in New York. Prompt me if I go wrong here, by the way.
That's good.
And a manuscript came across his desk, which took him a weekend to read through, at the end of which he felt he had discovered a new American literary great. And he embarked on a relationship with Thomas Wolfe as his editor, that brought these two men together on an extraordinary journey, both as collaborators, as friends, as surrogate father and son, and indeed drew them both away from the female relationships that they were in. And it's an investigation really of the creative process of editing a book and writing a book. It looks at the essence of what genius is. Is genius in collaboration? Is it in the hands of one man or another? Can someone be a genius of friendship? Can someone be just a genius of collaboration? And it's also an opportunity to look at, certainly from a British point of view, the life of these two great men who seem to have slipped somewhat into history's shadows.
Let's look at the clip. So I think we can watch it. So that wasn't the trailer after all, but I think it's well chosen, and it gets at the heart of their relationship. And I have to say that this is a movie that I brought a lot of personal interest to, because as they mentioned, I've spent much more of my life as an editor, indeed as a fiction editor, than I have as a writer. And it always seemed to me that editors were somewhat unsung. There aren't many movies about editors. In fact, I think this is only the second, and the first one, as I mentioned to Jude in the green room, the only other movie I know about an editor is Wolfe. And if you remember, with Jack Nicholson as an editor, but we don't actually get to see him do any editing because his main job is being a werewolf. But it interests me. The movie is based on a very good biography by Scott Berg, biography of Maxwell Perkins, that came out about 30 years ago. And so I'm curious, so that it takes all this time for someone to screw up the courage or the interest to make a movie about these two people. And it's curious to me that when it happens, it's a British theater director that does it. The movie is directed by Michael Grandage, who, in case people here don't know, he's easily the greatest British theater director of this generation. But this is his first movie.
That's right.
So I'm curious, he could have, do you know, what was it?
Yeah, I understand that the order of events went like this. Scott obviously wrote the biography of Maxwell Perkins called Maxwell Perkins, Editor of Genius. I believe John Logan, our brilliant screenwriter, Academy Award-winning screenwriter, I believe, playwright too, yeah, who had worked with Michael. So there was a relationship there. They did work together on Red, which I believe was performed here. John read the book, read Scott's book, and really pleaded with him to have a chance to write the screenplay. That happened almost 10, 15 years ago, I believe, really? That long. The script was then, as many great scripts are, as you may well know, sort of passed around Hollywood like a volleyball. I believe it was a brilliant screenplay, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be made immediately. There was obviously it was a subject matter that wasn't immediately commercial. So it was, as I said, it was passed around Hollywood. I believe it landed in various directors' laps and was either looked at or investigated to be made, was never made, which again happens all the time. Along that journey, it picked up the interest of Colin Firth. And Colin, if you see it, recognized, I think, not a kindred spirit, but something in Maxwell Perkins that he really felt he had a handle on. So he was attached. And I think eventually the rights went back to John Logan, and he at this stage was obviously it was a passion piece, and was just very keen to have it made. And Michael And he, having collaborated, he knew that Michael was just interested to finally direct a film and was looking and reading scripts. This landed on his script, and finally it happened.
I was wondering, and I guess we'd need to ask Michael, but it struck me that he may have been interested in part because the job of being a director is not dissimilar from the job of being an editor, right?
I think he was curious. I think he recognized that there was, first of all, it was a piece about performance. It was a piece, not to limit it, but it was a piece. It's a domestic piece. It takes place in rooms and offices, and is very much about the spoken word. So I think for a theatre director, dipping his toe into the medium of film for the first time, it felt that it was an area he was experienced in and could bring his experience to. But you're right, and I've spent the day doing Q&As with him, so I can quote him quite succinctly in this. I know that he recognized in their relationship, in the relationship of a creative, well, they're both creative men. He recognized, I suppose, the collaboration between someone who is taking a sort of creative expression, a creative purge, if you like, and somehow steering, administering guidance and percolating it into a more refined state. And indeed, the piece raises that question. I think it's not just, obviously, on one level, it's very much a piece about the great works of Thomas Wolfe and what it took to put them on the page and indeed in the shops. But it's equally about the collaboration of creative minds and what is it, and where does genius exist in that?
So what attracted you to this?
Michael Grandage. I'd just finished, I'd played Hamlet for him, and I'd played Henry V for him. And when he said he was busy putting together this film, I was really curious to know how this hugely experienced and adept theatre director was going to take to the medium of film. And I remember he would come and talk to me during the run of Henry V in my dressing room towards the end of the run, and was always talking about various actors who could play Thomas Wolfe. And I remember after a few weeks thinking, he still hasn't asked me to read this script. What have I done wrong? And eventually it was almost, I think I actually saw the night where he was sort of talking about this actor and then kind of thought, maybe you should read it. And he let me read it. And so yes, in truth, I didn't really know who Thomas Wolfe was. And like many people, I assumed he'd written Bonfire of the Vanities. And I was just very excited about wearing white suits and Panama hats, and no, I didn't really. But I was excited because Michael was involved, and I thought, here's a man who I felt very, very safe in his hands and taken on some pretty meaty parts with, and come out feeling fulfilled and really happy with the experience. And then through John Logan's wonderful screenplay, I was introduced to the world of Thomas Wolfe, this extraordinary character. And on the page, it was clear here was an enormous character to sink one's teeth into. Ebullient and lecherous and drunken and loud, but brilliant and driven, motivated. I mean, it literally jumped off the page, and my first are we sure he was this big, he was this loud? And my only concern was that he was apparently 6'7", and I'm 5'11" if I'm lucky, when I stand up really straight, But of course, the scale of the man was very much in the piece, in the heart of what John Logan had captured from what he knew of Wolfe, and so that's where it all started. Yeah. Did you
eventually read Wolfe? He's not read much in this country anymore, I don't think.
I believe he was dropped from the syllabus in the 70s, possibly because of I've heard because of certain racist elements of his writing. And has kind of drifted out of...
Well, and the writing is also, the writing is like the personality, and you see this in the movie. It's huge, and it's not to everyone's taste.
No, quite. I did, because apart from anything, it was, I think if you're playing a writer, you you have to be familiar with the works. But also, fortunately, a huge amount of his writing is biographical, and so there's this mine of detailed insight into who he was, how he felt. I mean, starting literally from birth. I mean, I think the opening chapter of Look Homeward Angel takes place in his mother's womb, right. And proceeds from there.
It's too bad that the clip we saw doesn't show what you do with this part. I mean, which seems to me to perfectly kind of characterize his writing. It's your portrayal. It's big. It's exuberant. It's verges it's almost out of control, but
yes.
not. And as you say, he's a drunk. He's sentimental. He's lecherous, full of feelings, uncontrolled. Is that a hard kind of character to play? How do you do that without becoming yourself too much of a muchness?
You have to. Again, you have to trust your director, I think, because we were fortunate to have time to rehearse, but you're aware of the piece as a whole and the scale, if you like, or the touchstones that you want to reach at any given time in the performance, which, given a part like Thomas Wolfe or a man like Thomas Wolfe, are broad. You want to go from. There are scenes where he will cry one minute and be ecstatically happy on the next. Literally the toss of a coin. So you're suddenly looking at the spectrum of these characters and thinking about, gosh, okay, well, I think I can map this and I can get there emotionally. A lot of it is about releasing the emotional handbrake that one normally conducts oneself with and really pouring yourself into it physically. But the reason I refer back to having a director you can trust is because personally, the one voice I always had was, "God, is this too much? Am I overdoing it?" But of course, if you're a director with an objective point of view and you need a scene to carry the characters around him in certain directions or to react in a certain way, the director, of course, is saying, "No, you need to go there. Otherwise, they're not responding correctly." And what was wonderful about this piece is that at the other extreme, you have Maxwell Perkins, who by all accounts was incredibly contained and considerate and reliable, caught the same train home every night for 30 years, I believe, lived a very tame life. And so I think Michael saw it very much as a not a juggle, but a conducting these two extreme opposites delicately together,
So the other thing that's terrific in this movie, I think, is your Tar Heel accent. How did you get that? It's spectacular.
I worked with a really terrific voice coach, two actually on this film, because the chap I usually work with, Tim Monarch, who is just a master at his trade, gave me wonderful recordings that I listened to endlessly, just to get the sort of sounds, and he gives you these brilliant exercises that train the mouth muscles to make shapes that you're just not used to. It's interesting, if you have an accent, your muscles in your mouth are only used to making certain shapes, and you have to train the mouth to take on other shapes. And then Liz Hemmelstein was with us during the filming of Genius, and she was there being my ears every day and tweaking and helping me. Laura Linney too was actually from a town very near Asheville, and so having her on set was very helpful.
She plays Perkins' wife.
Perkins' wife, but it's very interesting just to combine both the text of Wolfe's books and also the challenge of getting the accent right. I was advised early on to, when practicing the accent, to recite from his literature, and what it enabled you to do was to try and hear how this man spoke. And of course, he famously used barely any punctuation, so his sentences would start and continue until he ran out of breath, and then would sometimes also take on, go in completely opposing directions. And it was wonderful at times to feel like you could hear him in the room. And I also read a lot of his letters aloud. And again, he would write these pages of letters, and it was a good way to conjure him up.